Are you looking at the PowerPoint now?
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. Maybe it didn't work.
I wish I would.
Okay. All right. Is everybody like ready to go on with the lecture or any more questions? Good? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I think we're ready to roll.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for letting me know you couldn't see that because everything pulled up on my screen saying that it was like, okay, so we're going to start with talking about the American bison or the buffalo. That's the species that we're going to talk about the most today, and then we'll hit on some other ones like llamas and alpacas a little bit later in. So the American buffalo is actually a little bit of a misnomer. American bison is distantly related to the water buffalo. So bison is kind of more of the direct there. People say both. They originated in Eurasia, and they crossed the Bering Strait about 10,000 years ago. By the 16th century, herds of bison, about approximately 70 million animals, actually roamed the Great Plains of North America, and they were the basis of the economies for the Native Americans. So the Native Americans hunted them a lot and used them for meat and their hides and everything like that. So, however, by 1880, the population of American bison was actually down to about only 1,000 animals, and the species risked extinction. So 1,000 is very, very few animals to have left of a species. And so conservation efforts actually saved the species from extinction. That was really important. So they're estimated that there are about 380,000 bison in the U.S. and Canada today. So it's really good that those conservation efforts were able to save them because otherwise they could have gone extinct very, very easily because people just overhunted them way too much. So just a little terminology for you to be familiar with. Similar to cattle, a cow is an adult female bison. A bull is an adult male bison. A calf would be young bison, and then calving is the process of doing it. So same terms that you would use with cattle. A lot of things with buffalo, bison are similar to cattle, but then there are a couple of things that are different that we'll talk about. And this is just a picture of a bison calf. So you can tell it looks kind of like a cow, cow's calf, cattle calf, but a little bit different. So bison production is actually increasing in the United States. Bison meat sales total approximately 249 million at the retail and restaurant level in 2006. And the American bison is very well suited to the Great Plains. As a ruminant animal, they can prosper on pastures of native grasses, and they can withstand the extremes of temperature better than domestic cattle. So that's one difference there. So bison are raised commercially for various markets. Their meat, heads, bones, and hides can be sold to restaurants, novelty shops, and individual buyers. Bulls and heifers can be sold to other producers as breeding stock. They can actually be sold for organized bison hunts, which I had never really thought about, but I guess that's a thing. And they can also be sold to the public game reserves and zoos as well.
If bison are still relatively low in number, being less than 1 million, why in the world are they still allowed to be hunted?
Allowed to be what?
Allowed to be hunted.
Depends on this. I'll let her answer.
I think it's just like the organized hunts and things like that. Their populations are not as much in like dire stress anymore because they are actually raised for meat in the U.S. So I think that the hunting is more of a controlled situation now, any hunting of bison that goes on, whereas before when they went extinct, it was just like out of control. Like there was no, regulation of it or anything. It was just crazy. But now I would say that hunting of bison would be kind of tightly controlled. John, if you have anything to add, feel free.
No, you're right. And they're actually being farmed quite extensively.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing their population's above a few 100,000 now.
Well, it depends, Tyler, on whether you're talking about domesticated ones or wild ones. And they're actually there are wild populations of bison, but they're I know of one farm in Craig County that's got quite a population of them, and they're you can go to a little country store out there, and they have ground bison steaks, and everything available for sale in that store because they're farming them there.
Yeah.
People in Campbell, on the other side of Campbell, and it's no problem. They drop them there.
Okay, so a little bit about bison meat, and like John said, they are being farmed. My great uncle actually has a buffalo bison farm, so I've had bison meat, and it's actually quite delicious. So the meat is low in fat and high in protein, and it actually has less calories than chicken or beef. And it's also lower in cholesterol than beef as well. So the American Heart Association and Weight Watchers actually recommend bison meat as a healthy alternative for people that still want to get that, red meat in their diet. Bison meat is a really good alternative because of the lower fat and lower cholesterol. It is a little bit more expensive, which we'll talk about later. So society's increased nutritional awareness has led to a high demand for bison meat. Because people are a little bit more aware of like what's healthy and what's not. And the supply can't fully meet the demand because like you saw the numbers compared to the numbers of cattle that we have, that's not that many. So the supply cannot fully meet the demand, and therefore the price of bison meat is higher than beef. So even if you ever go to a restaurant, some restaurants may randomly have like you can get a bison burger. That bison burger is probably going to be $2 to $3 more expensive than your cattle burger. Because just supply and demand. So bison reproduction, they are seasonally polyestrous, which everyone seems pretty familiar with that term now. We've talked about it quite a bit. So they do come into heat during a certain part of the year. So they actually have a breeding season that starts between mid-July and early August, with their calves born the following spring. So their gestation period is 266 days. And they will be sexually mature at 24 months or 2 years old. And then semen of breeding bulls is actually tested to ensure fertility because obviously you want to make sure that if you have a bull that is going to actually be, So mature cows will weigh between 1,000 and 1,500 pounds. With good management, cows should be able to reproduce every year. And they can actually live to be 30 years or older, so decent lifespan. Bulls can weigh about 2,000 pounds or a ton at maturity, and one bull can breed about 10 to 15 cows. And buffalo usually calve with ease, so we talked about with cattle, we talked about dystocia, that term for calving difficulty. Buffalo bison typically don't have a problem with this because they are, like John said, some of them do live in the wild, and they are a pretty wild species, so they have evolved to really calve with ease and not need much assistance. So that's a difference there. Some breeds of cattle actually can have quite a bit of problems. That's something about bison. So artificial insemination, we've talked about that with some of the other species. So it is an option for bison. However, natural breeding methods are a lot safer. Bison have very unpredictable temperaments. They are still, fairly wild, and so they can be pretty unpredictable when you have them in a group, or if you have them confined to try to actually artificially inseminate them, a challenge. And then another issue is the scarcity of bison semen. Because there are not as many bison as cattle, you don't have the organizations and things like that, as many as cattle that would actually be able to provide you with bison. And I imagine collecting that would also be more of a hassle than with cattle. So this is a thing to note from management of a herd. Young bulls should be brought into the herd every 3 years, and that is to prevent.
Okay, do it right now.
Is everything okay, John, or can you still...
No, it's fine. That was Jason. He just came in, and I told him to go take his test.
Okay.
Take it right now. That way we'll get that out of the way.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so young bulls should be brought into the herd every 3 years, and that's to prevent inbreeding. because typically you may have a good sized herd, but if you only have one bull, then eventually you're going to have a lot of inbreeding issues. So 3 years is kind of a good time point to rotate that bull out. And there are not that many, so you could always, if there's another one you know of, you could maybe swap herd bulls with another bison farm or work it out that way. But just bring a new one in every 3 years. So the producer's goal should be to improve the performance of the herd by breeding and selecting bigger animals that gain weight faster. And that's true for pretty much any species. So the beefalo is something that was a crossbreed of a cow and bison. So it's the hybridization of the American bison and domestic cattle. So you can see a picture of them there. They have the really big horns like the buffalo have, and then they kind of have a little bit of that kind of rougher looking coat. So domestic cattle and American bison are in different genera. So they're obviously different species, but they're also in different genera. But they can produce fertile crosses because cattle and bison have the same number of chromosomes. So when they crossbreed, their offspring is actually fertile. So it's a different situation from the mule because donkeys and horses have a different number of chromosomes. And so that's why the mule is infertile. So the beefalo, you could essentially have a beefalo farm if you wanted and actually have them reproduce. So the American Beefalo Association supports production and marketing of beefalo. So there actually is an association, so this is actually a real thing. Beefalo kind of sounds like a made-up term. So they make claims that those animals have greater hardiness. So that would kind of come from the buffalo, and then improved meat, which would also come from the buffalo. My great uncle who has a bison farm says that he's kind of also heard some other people on the other end of that sometimes depending on which way you cross it, depending on which species is the cow and which one is the bull, it could kind of go either way. You could get an improved animal, or you might get an animal that has the worst qualities of both, which would be bad meat and bad temperament. So I have heard that it kind of depends there either way, but they do claim that they have greater hardiness and improved meat. But that may not be with every animal.
So
Yes.
could a female cow, or I guess both would be cow, could you really use the buffalo as the sire? Would that be reasonable? I know a lot of times there's a concern when breeding a larger animal to a smaller.
Yeah. I would say the way to do it would be to do it the other way around. Because they are a little bit larger, but the cows are typically actually pretty close in size, depending on the breed also of cattle that you're using. So like Charolais would be really close to the size of a buffalo cow. So it would kind of depend, but because the bison cows do have that calving ease quality, I would say it would probably, in my opinion, make more sense to breed a cattle bull to a bison cow. That makes sense. That's just my opinion on what would be the easiest. I think depending on the breed of cattle you're using, you could maybe do it the other way around. But in my mind, that's what makes the most sense.
It'd be terrifying for me to think I was going to cross a buffalo and a Charolais with the temperament of a Charolais and as wild as they are.
Yeah.
I think it's right. A right wild combination.
Yeah, that would be nuts. So that's a good question, though. It's a really good question. So yeah, it's always important to keep in mind too, because like John, that was a very good point, because you also have to think about not just the size, but also the other qualities of that animal, and temperament and things like that. All of that plays into the equation when you're going to be crossbreeding, because you could have a bad situation where you make an animal that's even crazier than either one of those. So that's definitely a good point. So as far as herd breeding recommendations, you want to keep accurate health and production records. Cows that are difficult to breed should be culled, and that would be similar with a cattle farm. Animals that recover slowly from injury or illness should be culled. Animals that gain weight slowly should also be culled. And then you want to cull all but the best bulls. And typically with bison, you'll probably only have one because, and with cattle also, because you don't want the bulls kind of going at it. And then bring new bulls into the herd for breeding. Like we said, every 3 years is kind of a good turnaround time for that. So bison health, they can be vaccinated as cattle are, for example, for brucellosis. They do have stronger immune systems than cattle because they, are kind of more wild. There are some populations that live in the wild, so they have kind of built up stronger immune systems than cattle that are a little more, we'll call it like more pampered cattle, kind of for, have been more taken care of for longer. They can adapt to a wide range of environments, feed sources, and management systems. And just for fun, this is actually a picture of my great uncle's, one of his bison. So he actually has a farm in Lunenburg County that he sells meat and everything to. He doesn't really have like a little store like the one John was saying, but he does have a bison farm out there, like if you're coming from Victoria on the way to Chase City. So it's kind of a little hidden off the road, so I'm not sure how many people actually know it's there, but he has quite a few bison out there. And then he also has a cattle farm. But so he's actually a pretty good person for me to talk to when I want to learn about the differences between raising both. I've been out to his bison farm quite a few times. So for bison health, you want to test and quarantine all new animals for 3 months before allowing them to enter the herd. And that's just good practice with really any livestock species that you have. If you're bringing in new animals, you don't really necessarily know the conditions or what they've been exposed to. You want to quarantine them for a couple months to make sure that they're not going to get your whole herd sick. You do need a routine deworming program that should be developed with a veterinarian. And that's the same for cattle and sheep. Really, any kind of animal that's going to be out grazing, they can pick up internal parasites and things like that. So it's really good to have a deworming program. And that should be developed with a vet because it could depend on what's the, how much are they grazing, what's the state of the pasture that they're grazing, and things like that. What are the parasites that are common in this region? They may not need to be vaccinated for something that's a problem in the other parts of the country. So it really just depends. So it's always good to talk to a veterinarian in that instance to develop a system. And then external parasites like fleas or flies, mites, and ticks also need to be controlled. So that could be like, some liquids or things like that. But just make sure you kind of have a handle on that, just like you would with anything else. So for bison nutrition, they are ruminants, so like cattle and sheep and goats, they're in the same category. So they have the 4 compartments of the stomach. And I'm going to ask again because it didn't seem like anyone really answered me last time because I think it's important. What are the 4 compartments of the ruminant stomach? Can anybody tell me?
The rumen.
Yeah.
Rumen.
Rumen, omasum, abomasum, and reticulum.
Correct. Good job. Yep. So exactly. That's something that's always, good to be familiar with as well, especially if you're going to continue to take classes in animal science. That's really good to know those. So yeah, bison have the same setup as cattle. So in the wild, bison eat twigs, leaves, and grasses. So you can have an intensive grazing program with bison so you can really make the most of your pasture. And they can actually graze through the winter by rooting under the snow. So typically in the winter, if you have grasses that can kind of grow to be a little bit higher, that would be ideal, but they can graze under the snow. However, when the snow is coated with ice, you need to provide hay because when there's ice covering the snow, they can't root up under it and they can't get to that pasture. So hay should be available in that situation. Also, when pasture conditions are poor, like in the winter, and the nutritional value of your pasture is not that great, grain rations should be included. Salt, vitamins, and minerals should also be added as needed. Like with cattle, you can put out a salt lick and things like that. You can do something similar with bison. The added nutritional value that the salt, vitamins, and minerals will bring will help with their reproductive efficiency and their weight gain. And selenium supplementation is something that's really important, especially in the eastern U.S., because the soils in this part of the country are deficient in selenium, and selenium is really important for reproduction. So that's also something. Like any other species, clean, fresh water is a necessity. Bison require about 1 pound of roughage per 100 pounds of body weight. So to improve meat texture and flavor, as well as to help add weight gain, you want to begin feeding them grain 90 to 120 days prior to slaughter. So you could kind of finish them on a corn-based grain diet. And meat from bison that's finished on corn will actually kind of have a taste that's a little bit closer to the taste of beef, and some consumers prefer that. They say it would taste a little less gamey, like deer or anything like that. It would taste closer to beef and what people are familiar with if you do that. So for bison management, herds typically consist of 1 bull and at least 10 to 15 cows. If you think back to the reproduction slide where I said 1 bull can kind of reproduce with 10 to 15 cows, that's kind of where those numbers are coming from. You don't want to have more cows than your bull can actually mate with, because then that's pretty pointless. And you're going to have to pick up the slack there for those extra animals that aren't getting bred. So those are just some good numbers to think about. So their management is similar to beef cattle management, but there are some differences. And my great uncle has told me about horror stories of working with the bison compared to the cattle. He's had quite a few trucks beat up. So bison do still have some wild tendencies. So they are kind of semi-domesticated. I like to put them in the same category as cats. Cats are not fully domesticated, I don't think. They are technically, but so they're kind of like that. They're semi-domesticated where they can be kept and raised as livestock, but you really have to understand they do still have wild tendencies, and that needs to be accounted for. So bison are larger, stronger, and way more excitable than cattle. So that needs to, definitely be considered. They require special fencing and special handling facilities as well. So you can't just take a bunch of bison out to a farm that's been set up for cattle and hope for the best, because it's going to be a nightmare. So they require the same amount of pasture per animal as for cattle, usually 2 to 3 acres per cow and calf in the eastern U.S. And they're not considered domestic. Like I said, they're still very wild, so handle with caution if they get loose. So if they bust through a fence or anything like that, you need to be really careful about how you're going to get that animal back, because they are a lot harder to deal with than cattle. And this is just another picture of my great uncle's bison farm in Lunenburg. It was just a picture I took when I was there, and I thought it was kind of pretty, so I put that up there for us. So kind of along the lines of what we're talking about with management, so a strong containment system is essential. So I know, like, I have uncles that have Charolais that get out all the time, and Charolais can be difficult to handle, like John said. But you don't want a situation where any animal is getting out, but bison getting out is a different situation from cattle getting out. It can be very, very bad. And bison can jump fences and break almost any barrier that they want to. So you need fencing with tensile wires, and a high voltage of electricity is typically needed to contain that. And maybe even a little bit taller fencing than you would have for cattle. I know my great uncle's bison farm set up, he has a lot taller fences because they will jump more and a little bit higher than cattle typically, he said. So you want to make sure that you have a system that's going to keep them in, and you don't run into a situation where you've got a loose wild animal. They would be very hard to get back in. Any questions on bison before we move forward? Okay. Well, and Tom, I don't know if y'all ever want to visit a bison farm, let me know, and I can set you up with my great uncle. He has like a big trailer and things set up for tours and everything. So if y'all ever want to do that, let me know.
Cool. We might have to reschedule one of our labs near the end of the semester, so that might be an option. Cool.
Yeah, and it's he's right, like I said, he's in Lunenburg. He's kind of near Fort Mitchell, that area. But so hopefully it'd be a good drive for some. But yeah, if you want to do that, let me know and I can set that up, because it's not really something that you get to see that often. It's pretty cool that there actually is one in Southside.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk just a little bit about some other species. So the water buffalo is distantly related to the bison, which is called the American buffalo. So they are kind of related, but pretty distant. And they're the major milk producing species in India. So if you remember when we talked about the different animal products and how the United States is #1 for milk production from cattle, but India takes the #1 spot overall because they also have milk production from water buffalo. So that's what they're mainly used for in India. They can also be used as a draft animal, so they're very strong, so they can be used to kind of pull things. And they're important in Europe, and particularly Italy, where the milk is used to make mozzarella cheese. So if anyone is a mozzarella cheese fan, like I am, that's extremely important. So now we're going to talk about llamas and alpacas. So traditionally, llamas have been used as pack animals, and alpacas are used for fiber. Llamas are bigger than alpacas, so that's a good way to distinguish them. And on the next slide, I have a little bit more detail about that. Recently, llamas have been used as guard animals to protect sheep from dogs and coyotes. And they do a pretty good job. However, one of my uncles did have a llama that was actually attacking the sheep instead. So that can be a bad situation. So alpacas have hollow fleece fibers that can be used to weave blankets and other textile products. So this slide, hopefully you can see this picture. I know the text is a little bit light, so you may not be able to see it all that well. But so basically this is just kind of going over some of the ways to distinguish between a llama and alpaca. If you happen to run into one or the other and you want to show off your animal science knowledge and you can identify which one it is. So llamas are larger and they have curved ears and a long face and very little hair on their face. And then they have a long back, which makes them a good pack animal. They will typically be between 42 and 48 inches tall. And they're typically a solitary animal, and they can actually be used to guard alpacas. Then alpacas are a little bit smaller. They're very, very smart. They're definitely a herd animal, so they like to kind of be together. They have strong fiber that's very durable. The average alpaca stands between 34 and 36 inches tall. And then they're bred as a luxury fiber-producing animal. So just some of the differences there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Based on the spelling of the word llama, is it like a Spanish descent? Did the name come from that direction?
Yes, I believe I might have a slide about the domestication of llamas, but I'm pretty sure they're like kind of originating from the South American, Central American kind of.
It's a very Hispanic spelling.
Yes, for sure. And also like alpacas are huge in like Peru and South America. Alpacas and llamas are pretty, I would say, used more extensively in South America than they are in North America. So you're right. That's probably where that spelling comes from. Oh, here we go. Okay, I did have it in here. Okay. So llamas and alpacas were domesticated in South America. So they are kind of known as domesticated South American or New World camelids, so kind of close to camels. They were domesticated about 6,500 years ago from wild alpacas and llamas in the high Andes of what would be present-day Bolivia, Ecuador, northern Chile, and Peru. So definitely from South America. So good call on that one. So as far as reproduction, they are seasonal breeders in the native Andes, so in South America, but not in temperate climates with adequate feed. So it kind of depends. Their reproduction can vary a little bit depending on where you have them at in the world. Llamas and alpacas are induced ovulators. So what's the other species that we've talked about that's an induced ovulator?
Cat.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of interesting because that's not something that I would exactly think about when I think about llamas and alpacas. I would kind of think of them as like, being more similar to cattle or something like that. But they're induced ovulators like cats are, which is kind of interesting. So that means that they will ovulate only after they have been bred. So they have a gestation of about 343 days, so almost a year, poor things. And there's seasonal difference in the length of the pregnancy. So pregnancies that start in the spring will actually last a little bit longer than pregnancies that start at different times of the year. So there's kind of just a lot to consider when breeding alpacas and llamas because there are a lot of things that are really variable. there compared to some other animals. But induced ovulators is kind of good because at least you know that they are ovulating after they're being bred, and you don't have to necessarily worry about timing there. So about 20% of females will not become pregnant after mating, however. And that's just kind of, I'm not really exactly sure what would cause that, if that's just kind of something with their reproductive efficiency. But that is something to note, that not all of them are going to become pregnant after mating, even though they are induced ovulators. So ideally, everything should line up. But things happen, and the reproductive system doesn't always go as planned. Newborns are called crias. So that's just a interesting term for llamas and alpacas. It's different from some other species. And reproductive technologies have not been used extensively, but they are applicable to llamas and alpacas. So that would be like your artificial insemination and things like that.
So,
Yes. Do you have a question?
no, I'm all right.
Okay. If you think of it or you do, let's stop me. So as far as nutrition, their digestive system is similar to ruminants, but their what's called their forestomach has 3 compartments instead of 4. So kind of similar to ruminants, where each compartment has a specialized job, but they are kind of termed modified ruminants because it's not exactly the same setup. And so basically, their compartments are easier to remember than a full ruminant. It's just C1, C2, and C3. Compartments 1 through 3. Pretty easy. So basically, each one of those would have its own function. And that's just kind of how they're set up a little bit differently, so they are considered a modified ruminant. So llamas will eat before and browse. Alpacas are a little less likely to eat and browse around. The feeding program for both of them is usually based on roughage, with concentrates added as a supplement to the diet. So concentrates would be like maybe a corn or grain mix. And dietary changes must be made over time. And this can be true with other species as well, especially dogs. If you change their diet too fast, they can have gastrointestinal upsets, and you can have a lot of problems. And so actually in alpacas and llamas, I think more so alpacas, abrupt changes can cause potentially life-threatening digestive upsets. So if you're going to change their diet, you want to kind of do it over a span of 10 to 14 days, just very slowly mixing it in with what they're already eating, so that you don't really upset that gastrointestinal tract. And that's actually kind of the same with dogs, which I've learned with my dog, who has a super sensitive stomach. So just a little fun fact there.
Do you need a specific feed for his digestive tract? Something that's easy on the stomach?
Yeah, he's not on like a sensitive formula or anything like that. He's not quite that bad, but I've noticed that he gets sick a lot less when I do have him on. He actually gets Hill Science diet, so it's a little bit pricier than what I would like to pay. But I found that he has less digestive upsets with that, because I'm also an animal nutrition, so I'm the weirdo that goes in the store and reads the bag. Yeah, so I found with that he does a little bit better. But the main thing with him is that, like, I've had situations before where I was a horrible pet owner, and he ran out of a bag, and I couldn't find the brand that he used at the store, so I had to get him another one. So I wasn't able to transition over time. He got very, very sick for a couple of days, and kept me up all night, and it was awful. And so that can be true too with like puppies or really any kind of dog or cat. You really want to, if you're going to change their feed over to a new brand or something like that, you really want to start adding it into what they're already eating very gradually, and that will prevent them from getting sick. But some animals are a little more, prone to that than others. He's been like the worst dog that I've ever had about that. So it kind of depends.
If you need a special diet, then there's a diet formulated for
I pick the food that she wanted.
that my vet sells.
Pick the food that she wanted. Brought food from she would eat. She would eat.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to consider that.
That.
When I get out and get a job and I can maybe like afford the stuff that's actually more for sensitive stomachs, we'll probably have to do on that. His brother has to eat stuff with like fish in it because so yeah, dietary changes must be made over time. And alpacas and llamas are more efficient rough pasture feeders than cattle, sheep, and goats. As far as their health goes, llamas and alpacas actually have few disease problems, but you want to monitor newborns to make sure that they're healthy. Same with any species. Parasite control is important because they do graze on pasture. So you want a deworming program that's developed according to your local conditions, similar to any of the other grazing animals. Some vaccinations may be needed, kind of depending on what's kind of popular in your area, what diseases are going to pop up, what vaccines are available. And then foot care can vary between animals. We talked about with sheep, trimming their hooves and everything. But you may have some that need more trimming than others, and it varies. So you may not have to trim all of them, that often.
Are there spare feet and trimmings like pigs?
What'd you say?
Are their feet, like trimming their feet and everything, it's going to be the same as like pigs or goats or something?
Yeah, so we don't really trim them in pigs, but with goats, yeah, it would be kind of similar to that. But I feel like I've never had llamas or alpacas or anything, but I feel like they would need it trimmed a little bit less than sheep. Sheep are typically like the main ones that come to mind with like really having intensive foot care situations, but llamas and alpacas are really close. And to answer your question, I looked it up, and thrush is like pretty much the same as foot rot.
Okay.
You're the one that had that question, right?
Yeah.
Just remember that. I did look it up, and it is. I thought it was, but I wasn't 100% sure.
It appeared like it. It really did appear like it was very, very similar.
Yeah, so I think that they might just be like maybe caused by slightly different bacteria, but basically both of them are just terms for like bacterial infection of the hoof.
Right.
Yep. So now we're going to change gears and talk about rabbits very briefly. So rabbits were domesticated only about 1,400 years ago from a species of European wild rabbit that was native to Spain and North Africa. So the domestic rabbit is called that word that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce. I will not expect you to have to spell that. Nope, you're not going to have to spell that one because I don't even want to try to say it. So rabbits are typically raised for uses including meat, fur, or wool. They can be used as lab animals, as companion animals. I interned at a zoo, but actually you would be surprised that the most reported injuries came from rabbits. They have quite a kick. So they are companion animals if you get a sweet one. But rabbit meat production is relatively uncommon in the U.S. Because we have a lot of cattle and poultry and things like that. So not a lot of people eat rabbit. There are a lot of different breeds. So the American Rabbit Breeders Association recognizes over 50 breeds and varieties of rabbits with differences in size. So you have large, medium, small, and dwarf. Actually, at the state fair, we'll probably see a bunch of rabbits. They usually have some there. They're always cool to look at. And then ears. Some of them have ears that stand straight up. Some of them have ears that flop over. I think those are cuter. Color and then color pattern. Breeds for meat production are large breeds, including the New Zealand White and the Californian. And strains of wool-producing Angora rabbit include Chinese strains, which account for 95% of wool production.
Have you ever seen a Flemish giant?
Yes, they're so cool. I love those.
I want
them. They're really cool. We had one that was kind of a jerk at the zoo I interned at, though, and every time we take him out for a show, because you kind of grab them by scruff, and then they just kick like crazy with their back legs, and we just had marks all over our arms. We worked with others, a lot that could actually really hurt you, and everyone would be like, "What's the animal that causes the most injury?" So they are herbivores and simple-stomached, but they do have a large cecum. They are in the hind gut that fermentation actually occurs. So rabbits are considered hind gut fermenters. And what's the other animal that we've talked about that's hind gut? You might remember it's a really big animal. Quite a few of you in class really like it. A hind gut fermenter like a rabbit. It's not a cow, not cattle.
They stink.
Horses.
Yes.
They're hind gut fermenters. So, because horses are not ruminants, they have that large cecum where all the fermentation happens. So rabbits are not ruminants either. They're monogastrics. They're simple stomach, non-ruminants. So they are hindgut fermenters as well. Not all monogastrics are really considered hindgut fermenters, but all kind of maybe. So fiber is necessary for good health in rabbits. And then to more fully utilize plant fiber, rabbits have the strategy of coprophagy, which is actually a term that has always stuck with me. It was like a weird term that I learned in my intro class. And coprophagy basically means that an animal will consume its own feces. So it's really, really gross. But some animals will do that because when it goes through their digestive system the first time, not all of the nutrients are fully used. So they will eat it again and kind of give it a second pass to utilize more of the nutrients that they didn't get the first time. So if you think about it, it's actually a pretty useful tool, but it is really gross. So as far as rabbit nutrition for feed, that includes cereal grains, so oats, barley, or corn, and then a protein source, which would be soybean meal is typically a big protein source used in animal feed. And then you can supplement it with lysine and methionine, which are just two really important amino acids. So that would also be, protein. Pet rabbits may be fed alfalfa hay and or leafy vegetables and other root vegetables such as carrots. As far as reproduction, they are also reflex or induced ovulators, and they will ovulate about 10 hours after coitus, which is a term for mating, basically. So induced ovulators, you have the cat, you have llamas and alpacas, and rabbits. They're seasonal breeders, so their breeding will begin in early spring, so February, and continues until October. And they have a gestation of only about 30 days, and they'll typically have litters of 5 to 9. They have 44 chromosomes, and efforts on rabbit genetics mainly focus on color, breeds, and growth rate, as well as other production traits. So just a little bit about care and health. You can handle commercial meat or wool rabbits as little as possible to prevent stress, because any sort of stress will impact the meat quality as well as the wool quality. You don't want to be like grabbing them and being down their fur all the time. Rabbits should be lifted by loose skin in the scruff of the neck between the shoulder, and make sure that their weight is supported if you can get those legs under control. They're sensitive to very high temperatures, and adequate water supply is critically important. Same as any species, everything needs water. And then sanitation and good nutrition are essential. And then just really quickly about deer. So deer farming is relatively new, with an annual income globally of more than $100 million. So the major deer producing countries are New Zealand, Ireland, Great Britain, and Germany. And the deer species that are used for farming are the red deer, elk, fallow deer, and the white-tailed deer. And fallow and the red-tailed deer, or red deer, are the two main deer species that are actually farmed in the U.S. And I will be honest, I did not know that deer farming was a thing until I was preparing for this lecture. So I learned something completely new. And then deer products and restrictions. Two major products are venison and velvet antler, which is a byproduct used in Asiatic medicines. In some U.S. states, a permit from the Fish and Game Agency is required for deer farming because they are technically a wild animal. Deer are also susceptible to chronic wasting disease, which is a prion-caused disease. So another prion-caused disease, I don't know if anyone remembers it, that we talked about in cattle. Does anybody know what it is?
Mad cow disease.
Yes, correct. Mad cow disease is a prion-caused disease. So
You don't
deer
have to throw all.
to chronic wasting disease, where basically they just will not gain weight and then, wasting away. That is all I have for. Questions, I will here.
I guess we'll see y'all, most of y'all on Friday, tomorrow. And
Tomorrow.
the rest of you see you next week sometime.
Tuesday.